Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a deep dive into what reviewers have been saying about The Liar Princess and the Blind Prince, a title that didn't exactly dominate headlines when it released, but has quietly built a reputation as one of those games people remember long after they finish it. This is a game developed by Nippon Ichi Software, a studio known for doing things a little differently and that really shows here. Instead of chasing trends or trying to be the biggest, most technically impressive game on the market, this one leans heavily into storytelling, atmosphere, and emotion. And based on what critics have said, that decision is both its greatest strength and its biggest limitation. Right out of the gate, reviewers almost universally highlight the game's premise as something that immediately stands out. You play as a wolf who accidentally blinds a prince and then takes on the form of a princess to guide him through a dangerous forest. That setup alone creates a constant tension throughout the game. You're helping him, but you're also lying to him. Critics consistently point out how this moral contradiction is what drives the emotional core of the experience. It's not just a story being told to you, it's one you actively participate in, and that makes a difference. Reviewers often describe the narrative as feeling like a dark fairy tale, the kind that doesn't shy away from consequences or uncomfortable truths. There's a simplicity to the way the story is told, but that simplicity is intentional. It allows the emotional beats to land without being overcomplicated, and many critics say that by the end, it genuinely resonates in a way they didn't expect going in. Another area where reviewers are almost completely in agreement is the presentation. The art style is one of the most praised aspects of the entire game. It has this hand-drawn storybook aesthetic that feels like you're flipping through the pages of a fairy tale as you play. Critics frequently mention how every screen looks like it could be framed as artwork, and that visual consistency helps immerse you in the world. It's not just about looking good either. The art direction reinforces the tone of the story. It's soft and whimsical on the surface, but there's an underlying darkness that becomes more apparent the longer you play. The soundtrack also gets a lot of attention in reviews, with many pointing out how it complements the emotional weight of the story without ever overpowering it. It's subtle, it's atmospheric, and knows exactly when to step forward and when to stay in the background. But this is where the conversation starts to shift, because while reviewers love the story and presentation, the gameplay is where opinions become more mixed. A very common critique you'll see is that the gameplay is extremely simple. This is a puzzle platformer at its core, but the puzzles themselves are often described as straightforward, sometimes to the point of being too easy. Critics note that the mechanics don't evolve much as the game progresses, which can make the experience feel a bit repetitive. You're essentially guiding the prince, switching between your wolf and princess forms to solve environmental puzzles and avoiding hazards. It works, but reviewers frequently say it never really pushes you to think in new or challenging ways. For some players, that simplicity is actually a positive. It keeps the focus on the story and prevents frustration from breaking immersion. But for others, especially those looking for deeper gameplay systems, it can feel like the game is holding back. Another point that comes up again and again in reviews is the length. This is not a long game by any stretch. Most people finish it in just a few hours, and critics are pretty split on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Some argue that the short runtime works in the game's favor because it keeps the story tight and focused. There's no filler, no unnecessary padding, just a beginning, middle, and end that delivers what it sets out to do. Others, however, feel like the game ends just as it's starting to build momentum. They wanted more time with these characters, more development, more complexity, and the short length leaves them feeling like there was untapped potential. That ties directly into another criticism, replay value. Because the game is so linear and story-driven, there's not much incentive to go back once you've completed it. You've seen the story, you've solved the puzzles, and unless you're revisiting it purely for the emotional experience, there's not a lot pulling you back in. What's interesting, though, is how reviewers frame these criticisms. This isn't a case where the game is seen as failing. It's more that it's very specific in what it's trying to do. Critics often emphasize that this is less of a traditional game and more of an interactive story. If you go in expecting something mechanically deep or highly challenging, you're probably going to come away disappointed. But if you approach it as a narrative experience, something closer to a playable fairy tale, you're much more likely to appreciate what it offers. That's really the key takeaway from most reviews. Your enjoyment of this game depends heavily on your expectations. Another thing reviewers touch on is how memorable the game is despite its simplicity. Even critics who point out its flaws often admit that it stuck with them after they finished it. That's not something every game can say. There's something about the combination of its story, its art style, and its emotional core that leaves an impression. It might not be the most complex or the longest experience, and in an industry where bigger and more complex often gets all the attention, that's actually pretty significant. So when you look at the overall critical consensus, it's surprisingly consistent. Most reviewers agree that The Liar Princess and The Blind Prince is a beautiful emotional experience that succeeds in what it sets out to do, even if it doesn't appeal to everyone. It's often described as short but meaningful, simple but effective, and flawed but unique. It's not trying to compete with massive AAA titles or redefine gameplay mechanics. Instead, it focuses on telling a story in a way that only games can. And for a lot of critics, that's enough to make it worth experiencing. If you made it this far and you're enjoying the video, make sure to hit that thumbs up. It really helps the channel out. And if you're new here, consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. Also, if you want to support the channel on a deeper level, check out my Patreon. My latest exclusive over there is a deep dive into whether or not Xbox exclusives are truly dead, and it's a topic I think a lot of you will find interesting. At the end of the day, The Liar Princess and The Blind Prince is one of those games that proves you don't need a massive budget or complex systems to leave an impact. Sometimes all you need is a strong idea, a clear vision, and the willingness to stick to it. It might not be for everyone, but for the people it connects with, it's something special. And that's going to do it for this one. Until next time, game on.